Hi everyone, today we are in our recent acquisitions gallery, a dedicated space where we exhibit some of our collections we have recently received. Today we are going to look at folk art. We are fortunate to have several pieces gifted by Jim and Dorothy McLeod that are now part of our permanent art collection here at Glenbow. Let's take a look and see what we can uncover about the themes and techniques by looking at the pieces. We'll begin with this piece by Johann Makar. What do you notice? One of the first things I notice is the vibrancy of color. When we look closely, the colors really pop in these paintings. Do you notice the colors and how bright they are? Does this scene look really realistic? At a closer look, the painting looks fairly simple, but the artist has created depth to this everyday scene through objects and textures. In this next piece by Kosov, we notice that there is a lack of mathematical perspective. Yes, the buildings get smaller as they go back, but the perspective itself is off and almost flat looking. So far, we've seen buildings, trees, people, pretty regular settings, just normal everyday life. In this next painting called Prairie Harvest by Arnold Russell, we notice the grain elevators in the background, but the entire painting has a quirky feel. Russell has created a dynamic and interesting painting just through the use of color, shape, and line, as well as the subject matter that draws us in. When we look at the perspective in this painting, we can see that again it's fairly flat, but the way that Russell has placed the objects, like the haystacks for example, gives us the illusion that everything is going back in space. They're not getting smaller, they're just in a line behind one another. He has also used the most subtle shadowing on the grain elevators and on the ground. But at a closer look, the light is coming from several different angles, and you can't tell where the sun would be in the sky. Again, this everyday farming scene has become fun and colorful as the painting catches your eye. In this next painting, Dion Wires has used a textural brushstroke to add depth. Do you notice that the perspective is not correct again? Do you see the way the buildings are positioned? This shows perspective in an off way and adds a whimsical tone to the work. I love this painting by Anne Harbutz. It shows us the simpleness of everyday life, a theme that seems to run throughout these pieces, but again, in a way that makes the daily movement of life so interesting. Taking a closer look, the details in the women's clothing might give us some clues about her culture. Do you have any ideas? And finally, in this last piece we'll focus on by Johann Makar, we see a circle of people holding hands. When we look, the people again look quite flat, but Makar has set them up in a way that we seem to know that they are standing. Again, a fairly simple scene, flatness, and lots of bright color. Now, let's recap and talk a little bit more about what folk art is. When we start to think back on the subject matters and techniques and add them into our conversation, what do you think we can understand about folk art? Is there a connection that you see in each of these paintings? What about the subject matters? I see scenes of everyday life, nature, and people. Is there a connection to the way in which these paintings were created? There's definitely lots of color and a flatness that gives them a whimsical charm. The perspective is not mathematically correct, yet the artists still seem to show that sense of space. Typically, folk artists are not trained as artists, and their themes are unsophisticated, but their work is highly original. Folk artists don't create pieces that are easily put into categories. Too simplistic for fine art, not quite craft, and sometimes eccentric. Their work can range from paintings to carvings, weather vanes to whirligigs. Sometimes It can be purely whimsical and rooted in the particular imagination of the artist. Many say that folk art was created from a longing to make things human and find meaning in the daily work and home life, and such reflected the cultural and regional diversity of the areas they were from. So, now that we understand a little bit more about folk art, here's my challenge to you. What will you create? Many folk artists say, paint what you know. Is there anything in your neighborhood you find interesting? Scenes of everyday life at your house, maybe? The easiest way is to take a picture first and then work from there. You can create anything you want. That's what's so great and so cool about folk art. There are no rules. Just make sure you have fun. If you want to share, tag us. We can't wait to see what you've created.